The 10 most vicious killers in the city of Los Angeles. Welcome back to Creepshow, the channel where we delve into the dark and twisted corners of history. Today, we're going to explore the chilling stories behind some of the most notorious killers who ever stalked the streets of Los Angeles. From the cunning manipulations of cult leaders to the horrific acts of serial murderers, we'll uncover the gruesome details that make up LA's sinister past. Buckle up, because this is going to be a terrifying ride through the city of Angel's most vicious and infamous killers. The city of Los Angeles. These are the Angel City. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's an interesting location. There are millions of tourists who go to Los Angeles County in search of the sand, sun, and glamour that Southern California has to offer. These tourists come from Hollywood, Malibu, and Pasadena. Those who are extraordinarily wealthy, as well as music bands and movie stars, call this place home. Despite the fact that there are many things to adore about Los Angeles, the city may be risky. It should not come as a surprise that the county has high crime rates given that it has a population of over 9 million people as a whole, with approximately 4 million people living in the city of Los Angeles alone. The LA is a city that, over the course of its 200-year existence, has been home to more than its fair share of cruel and sadistic murderers. Many different types of killers can be seen roaming the streets of this city, ranging from the lowest street thug to the top mob rulers. There has been an abundance of documentaries and other programming centered on serial killers that has been broadcast on television networks in recent years. Now that we have that out of the way, let's take a look at the list of the most vicious killers in Los Angeles and make sure we uncover the city's dark side. Number 10. The Lonely Hearts Killer. Between 1957 and 1958, Harvey Glattman, sometimes known as the Lonely Hearts Killer or the Glamour Girl Killer, was responsible for the deaths of at least 3 women, moved to Los Angeles. In 1957, she started hanging out with modeling agencies and began acting. From the other side of the street or just around the corner, he would shoot photographs of women entering and exiting the building. In the event that he saw a model that he liked, he would pretend to be a photographer and make a commitment to secure modeling jobs for magazines. As soon as they arrived at his studio or apartment, he would bind them, rape them, and then kill them, most of the time by strangling, before disposing of their remains in the desert wilderness. It was through an advertisement in the Lonely Hearts newspaper that he met the 3rd victim, which is where the name comes from. The previous 2 victims were models. Judy Ann Dull, Shirley Bridgeford, and Ruth Mercado are among the people who have been identified as his victims. When a passing police officer observed him battling on the side of the road with Lorraine Vigil, who would have been his 4th known victim, he was apprehended and taken into custody. In addition to confessing to the first 3 murders, he provided the investigators with information on how to locate a toolbox in which he had contained photographs of his vicious work. At San Quentin State Prison, Glattman was put to death on September 18, 1959, using the gas chamber as the method of execution. It was only 3 killings for which he was found guilty, but there are experts who believe that he may have been responsible for further deaths that occurred outside of Los Angeles. Number 9. The Grimm Sleeper. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. has been given the label Grimm Sleeper due to the fact that he did not commit any murders for 14 years until his most recent 2 victims. Beginning in 1985 and continuing until 1988, he was active. After then, he absconded till the year 2002. There were at least 10 deaths that were attributed to the Grimm Sleeper, and the authorities suspect that he may have been responsible for as many as 15 more deaths than that. NHI, which stands for No Human Involved, was the first designation given to the deaths of the majority of his victims, who were young prostitutes. An explanation of deaths that were caused by drugs and prostitution was provided using the acronym. Until the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, was put under pressure by the community, the fatalities were not investigated as serial homicides. In order to carry out his criminal activities, Franklin would first provide rides to his victims, who he would then sexually attack and ultimately kill. As a result of his habit of disposing of their bodies in alleys or dumpsters, it was originally impossible for the authorities to establish a connection between the killings. In 2010, DNA evidence established a connection between him and the murders, which was a defining moment in the investigation. A significant contribution to his capture was made by cutting-edge forensic techniques, such as DNA matching with members of his family. There is just one of his victims who is known to have survived, and that is Laura Moore. After approaching her at a bus terminal and offering to give her a lift, Franklin opened fire on her with 6 bullets while she was riding in his vehicle. In 2010, Moore was able to survive her assault and assist law enforcement in capturing Franklin. Although Franklin was found guilty and condemned to death in 2016, he passed away on March 28, 2020, while he was in the process of awaiting his execution. A documentary about Grimm Sleeper was produced by HBO in the year 2014. Number 8. The Highway Killer. Over the course of the late 1970s, Southern California was terrorized by William Bonin, who was also known as the Freeway Killer. When Bonin was born on January 8, 1947 in Connecticut, he experienced a difficult childhood that was marked by both abuse and neglect. After serving in the United States, his criminal activities became more serious. After committing sexual misconduct while serving in the Air Force, he was dismissed with dishonor. Beginning in 1979, Bonin went on a killing rampage that lasted until 1980, when he was finally apprehended. His crimes included kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of young men and boys, and he frequently picked them up while they were hitchhiking. He was notorious for his crimes. After luring his victims into his vehicle, Bonin would bound, torture, and ultimately kill them before discarding their remains along freeways in Southern California. Bonin's victims lived in Southern California. In certain instances, his collaborators, such as Vernon Butts and Gregory Miley, provided assistance in the commission of the crimes. Because of the extensive extent of the deaths, the investigation into the Freeway Killer involved a number of different law enforcement authorities. In the end, Bonin's capture was made possible by a combination of forensic evidence and the testimony of witnesses. The authorities suspect that he may have been responsible for at least 21 murders, despite the fact that he was found guilty of only 14 homicides. After being found guilty of raping, torturing, and killing 14 young boys, Bonin was sentenced to death in the year 1982. During the time that he was holding out for execution in 1983, he was found guilty of 4 additional murders and sentenced to death. As the first person in the history of California to be executed by lethal injection, Bonin was put to death by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison in the year 1996. Number 7. Hillside Stranglers, or Stranglers. A group of notorious serial killers known as the Hillside Stranglers tormented the city of Los Angeles between the years 1977 and 1978. Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr. were cousins and were members of the Hillside Stranglers. Bianchi and Buono, who were born in 1951 and 1934, respectively, went on a heinous killing spree, during which they kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered young women and girls. Their bodies were subsequently discarded in the hills that surrounded Los Angeles. Late in 1977, they began committing horrible crimes against vulnerable women, particularly prostitutes and runaways, and became increasingly violent. For the purpose of enticing their victims to a remote location, the two would assume the identity of police officers who were not on duty. After that, The kind and helpful approach would transform into a chilly and deliberate evil. From the area where their victims' bodies were discovered, which were frequently staged in grotesque styles on slopes, the Hillside Stranglers were given the epithet Hillside Stranglers. The investigation into the Hillside Stranglers was one of the most exhaustive in the history of Los Angeles. It required a significant amount of labor from the police and instilled dread in the community. The media did not begin to pay attention to the issue until after the murders of 5 girls who were not prostitutes but who had been kidnapped from communities that were considered to be middle class. In an effort to elude capture, Bianchi relocated to Bellingham, Washington, where he committed additional killings that ultimately led to his arrest in 1979. This was the moment that the breakthrough occurred within the investigation. In a short amount of time, his connection to the murders in Los Angeles was discovered. Under intense pressure, Bianchi admitted his guilt and accused Buono, which ultimately resulted in Buono's imprisonment. After being tried for their crimes, both individuals were found guilty of them. Buono was sentenced to life in jail without the chance of release and passed away in 2002. Bianchi, on the other hand, is still incarcerated in Walla Walla, Washington, where he is serving multiple life sentences. Number 6. The Trash Bag Killer. Between the years 1965 and 1977, Patrick Kearney, also known as the Trash Bag Killer, concentrated his criminal activities mostly in Southern California. Kearney was a very educated guy who had a difficult life. He was born on September 24, 1939, in the East Los Angeles neighborhood of Los Angeles. The middle of the 1960s marked the beginning of his murderous spree, during which he targeted young men and boys who were frequently hitchhikers. He would pick them up, sexually attack them, and then kill them. Before going to Redondo Beach, which is located outside of Los Angeles, Kearney had a brief marriage to a woman. Among other things, developing a romantic relationship with David Hill. Kearney would sneak away in his Volkswagen Beetle, pick up hitchhikers, and then kill them. This would happen frequently while the two of them were arguing. His patience eventually ran out while he was waiting for hitchhikers, and he started going to homosexual bars in search of victims. The majority of the time, he would kill his victims in the head in order to avoid a struggle, and then he would dismember their bodies thereafter. He disposed of the remains in garbage bags, which he would distribute along roads and in rural regions, garnering him the nickname Trash Bag Killer. His methodical methodology and the ephemeral nature of his victims provided him with an early advantage in evading detection. A young boy named Ronald Dean Smith, who was only 5 years old, was the youngest victim of this monster. The year 1977 marked a significant turning point in the investigation when Kearney was taken into custody following an unsuccessful attempt to kidnap a victim who managed to flee and furnish the authorities with vital information. Following his arrest, Kearney admitted to perpetrating 21 murders. However, it is believed that he may have committed as many as 43 homicides. His confessions were quite comprehensive, revealing in terrible detail how he chose his victims, murdered them, and then disposed of them. Number 5. The Skid Row Slasher. During the middle of the 1970s, Vaughn Orrin Greenwood was responsible for the slit throats of at least 11 individuals who were living in alleys and squatting grounds in Hollywood. Alcoholics, homeless people, and transients were the targets of Vaughn's attacks. Although the Skid Row Slasher began his profession in 1964, he only committed 2 murders before withdrawing from the industry for a period of 10 years. In the year 1974, he went back to killing with a fury, carrying out 9 attacks within a span of 2 months. Between 1974 and 1975, he was responsible for the deaths of at least 11 men who were slashed across the throats and suffered terrible wounds all over their bodies. The location and nature of his assaults led to him being given the nickname Skid Row Slasher as a result of his criminal activities. The victims were frequently discovered with their throats slit and their bodies posed in unsettling ways, which suggests that the perpetrators may have been motivated by ritualistic reasons. Additionally, there was evidence that Greenwood had consumed the blood of his victims. On account of the fact that many of the victims led nomadic lifestyles, the investigation conducted by the police encountered a number of important problems. These challenges made it impossible to establish patterns and to collect consistent witness testimony. But things took a turn for the better when Greenwood was taken into custody for a burglary charge that was unrelated to the case. At the beginning of February 1975, Greenwood made an effort to get into the residence of the well-known Hollywood actor Burt Reynolds. He left some of his mail in the driveway, and shortly after that, the cops came to pick him up. In the end, the police were able to link him to the slasher case because his fingerprints were found to be identical to those found at the crime scenes. Greenwood was found guilty of 9 murders in 1977 and sentenced to life in prison without the chance of release. He spent his entire life behind bars and passed away in the year 2020. Number 4. The Scorecard Killer. Between the years 1971 and 1983, Randy Kraft, who was notoriously known as the Scorecard Killer, was mostly active in the state of California. He was born on March 19, 1945 in Long Beach, California, and was recognized for his intelligence as well as his external look, which appeared to be normal. This appearance served to conceal the horrible acts that Kraft committed. He would provide rides to young males who were typically hitchhikers or members of the military. Kraft's target audience was young guys. His method of operation consisted of administering drugs, torturing innocent people, sexually assaulting them, and finally taking their lives. His sadistic methods, which frequently included strangulation or asphyxiation, earned him a reputation for being terrible. He would sometimes mutilate the bodies of his victims after he had killed them, and then he would dispose of them along highways and in distant regions. When Kraft was taken into custody, a mysterious list was discovered in his possession. This list gave rise to the epithet Scorecard Killer, which was given to Kraft. Similar to a scorecard, the list included cryptic references to the people who had been victimized by him. Despite the fact that Kraft was found guilty of 16 murders, investigators believe that this list chronicled as many as 67 individual victims. An incident that occurred in 1983 when Kraft was stopped by the California Highway Patrol for a routine traffic stop was the event that proved to be the turning point in the case. Officers discovered a body inside the vehicle, in addition to narcotics, restraints, and images of the individuals who had been killed. Because of this evidence, he was taken into custody and ultimately found guilty. A death sentence was handed down to Randy Kraft in 1989, and he is still currently being held on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Number 3. The Night Stalker. Between the years 1984 and 1985, Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was an infamous American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who terrorized Southern California. He was noted for his unsettling behavior. Born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Ramirez's criminal activities and violent impulses started early in his life, driven by a dysfunctional background and exposure to violence. The spontaneity and severity of Ramirez's criminal rampage were two of its defining characteristics. He would break into homes at night, attacking men, women, and children of diverse ages and origins. He employed exceptionally brutal methods which included bludgeoning, stabbing, shooting, and sexual assault, among other violence. As a result of the fact that he frequently left symbols and inscriptions at the crime locations, his criminal activities also involved acts of demonic worship. His initial assault on Jenny Vinkow, who was 79 years old, resulted in the elderly woman coming dangerously close to being severed from her head. Over the course of 1 year, he continued to act in this manner, and although he was only found guilty of 13 murders, many authorities suspect that he committed additional murders. Although there were a few persons who were able to escape encounters with him, his attacks were extremely violent and demeaning. He frequently preyed upon couples, first raping and killing the lady, then killing the guy using a broad variety of weapons. He was a serial killer. He was given the nickname Night Stalker by the media because of the fact that his attacks occurred throughout the night, which caused widespread panic throughout the areas he targeted. The police initiated a vigorous manhunt, employing a variety of investigation strategies and making extensive pleas to the general public for information. On the 31st of August 1985, Ramirez was eventually apprehended after being recognized and seized by a group of neighbors in the East Los Angeles neighborhood. The depth of his horrible actions was brought to light during his trial, which was one of the most publicized in the history of the United States. Over the course of 1989, Ramirez was found guilty of a variety of offenses, including but not limited to 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. After being sentenced to death, Richard Ramirez remained on death row at San Quentin State Prison until his passing on June 7, 2013, which was caused by complications connected to B-cell lymphoma. Number 2. The Golden State Killer. Serial killer, rapist, and burglar Joseph James DeAngelo, also known as the Golden State Killer, committed a string of horrible crimes in the state of California between the years 1974 and 1986. He was infamously known as the Golden State Killer. DeAngelo was born in Bath, New York on November 8, 1945, and he participated in the United States military. After serving in the Navy, he went on to become a police officer, which enabled him to avoid capture for a number of years. In the middle of the 1970s, DeAngelo began his career of criminal activity. He was initially referred to as the Visalia Ransacker because he committed a series of burglaries in Visalia, California. In Sacramento, where he committed more than 50 rapes, he later became known as the East Area Rapist. He extended his criminal behavior to include more severe offenses. In addition, by the late 1970s and 1980s, he was recognized as the original Night Stalker, a person who was responsible for at least 13 homicides in the Southern California region. In addition to breaking into residences, binding and abusing his victims, and frequently taking personal things, his method of operation includes breaking and entering. Because of his meticulous planning and the fact that he leveraged his background as a police officer, DeAngelo was an especially evasive suspect. This man was one of the most prolific serial criminals in the history of the world. He was responsible for 13 verified murders, 50 rape victims, over 200 burglaries, and endless years of terrorizing the state of California. Using genetic genealogy, police were able to identify DeAngelo using DNA evidence acquired from crime scenes in 2018. This was the moment that marked a significant breakthrough in the investigation. Through the use of this novel approach, he was connected to the crimes, which ultimately resulted in his arrest on April 24, 2018. Number 1. The Manson Family. An entire family of murderers is someone that no single person can compete with. The Manson family killings, usually referred to as the Tate LaBianca murders, were a string of heinous atrocities that were carried out in August of 1969 by Charles Manson and his followers. Manson, a charismatic cult leader, used a group of teenage followers who were collectively referred to as the Manson Family to carry out his deadly agenda, which he referred to as Helter Skelter, a term that was stolen from a song by the Beatles. Manson led his followers, including Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to a house on Cielo Drive on August 8, 1969. The reason for this was that the previous owner of the house was a record producer who refused to sign Charles to a contract. Not only did they take the life of resident and actress Sharon Tate, but they also took the lives of several other affluent socialites who were present at the time, including Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Frykowski. It was 8 months into Tate's pregnancy. Leno and Rosemary LaBianca were among the victims of an equally horrible murder that took place the following evening. Manson and his followers were finally found guilty of the killings after being arrested as a result of the high-profile inquiry that led to their arrest. Initially, Manson was given a sentence of execution, but in 1976, when California abolished the death penalty, his sentence was changed to life in prison instead of death. In 2017, he passed away while incarcerated. That's it for today's deep dive into the underbelly of Los Angeles. If you found this video as chilling as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Creepshow for more spine-tingling tales from the darkest corners of history. Let me know in the comments which killer story shocked you the most, and if there are any other sinister figures you want me to cover in future episodes. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay safe out there, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your lights on.